Welcome to iReport. This video will do a very brief overview of all the components on the screen, at least some of the key ones. We'll cover the report inspector, the main area, and the properties. So first, actually put something there. Let's create a new report. We'll open that template. We'll make it sample 1. And I always like to save these reports into my folder where I'll actually be using them in Fishbowl. So let's go to program files. I have several Fishbowl installations, different versions set up. Server reports. Now normally I would put it in my custom folder, not customer, custom. But on this installation I have not yet loaded a custom report, so I don't have a custom folder. And you can't just create a custom folder here. You have to let Fishbowl create it when you install one. So I'm just going to save it for now to this folder, and I'll move it into my custom folder after I create it, which I'll probably not show you in this video. All right, here we are. So report inspector, this is basically where you have everything that you're dealing with elsewhere in your report. And you'll notice that when I click on something in the report inspector, then the properties show up over here. So I could rename that, hit enter, and that renames the report. Not the report file, however. You see the sample1.jrxml. JRXML is the file which you use to edit your reports and build them, and later we'll export them and they'll become a Jasper file. So changing the name of the report, this will show up sometimes as the display in some areas of the report, display name, but not the actual file name. I usually name the file name and the JRXML file name, and thus the Jasper file name when it gets rendered, compiled, to the same thing so that it's less confusing if people need to find a report. It's the same one, the same name that they see on the screen. In the report inspector, you'll notice there we have styles, and a style is basically something where you can save. And by the way, notice that I don't have any styles, and so nothing shows up in the styles properties. I right click and say add. I want to add a style. Now I have style 1 and it shows up here. And here you can save certain settings so that you can quickly apply them to various fields and elements later. Let's do one. I'm going to name one named center. And for this one, I'm going to set 2 settings, the horizontal alignment to center and the vertical alignment to middle. This is something I often create for barcodes because there's not another way to center a barcode. You have to create a style and apply it to the barcode. You'll see that later. Parameters is something, and you'll notice that there are some of these already in place, some default ones that iReport creates. We'll look into this more and explain what these are. But for one thing, this is where you create something in Fishbowl in the modify report window. If you want to set a date range or select a certain sales order number, you create a parameter for it here, and then it appears in the modify report window and people can make a selection and that alters the report. Fields comes from your query, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we don't have any fields yet, but that's, for example, SO number or SO item number or product number, etc. All those things that will later show up in your report that will pull from the database and display on the report. Those are fields. I'll show you how to get those. And variables, the last thing we'll talk about here. Some of these are already built in, so you can add a page number to a page, and in some cases you want to create a new variable to show like a total at the bottom of the page and such. So those are the main elements that you'll be adding to your reports. And then we also have, below that, we have these are the bands, title, and you'll notice that appears right here, title band, and right below it we have the page header band, column header band. This is where you will place your elements. So, for example, I'm going to press Control-Shift-8, and that brings up my palette. And I'm going to bring in some static text. I'm just drag it over to the title band. Double-click this to edit it. There we go. Report title. Hit enter. So now you see that I have this label in the title band. And you can, this is a WYSIWYG editor. So let's say I want to center that and align it in the middle. And I want it to be bold and 14 points. Of course, if I go too large, then it just disappears because it doesn't fit in the band, but I can always expand the band or the field, the element height, and then it will show. If I drag this from, say, the report title down to the column header, you notice that it also moves there. But there are some cases where, for example, it can appear like it's somewhere else. If I click on it and I say from the top I want it to go down 200 points, now it looks like it's down in the detail band, but on the left you'll see it's still in the title band, because it is. And you'll notice it has this little exclamation error thing because it's outside of the title band. It doesn't fit in there. So if I drag it back up in there, now you see the top is back at 0 and it fits inside. My little alert is gone, etc. Title band displays on the first page of the report. So if you have 5 pages, whatever you place here in the title band is only going to appear on the first page. Page header, however, if I put it there, that will make it appear on every page. By the way, I can resize these bands to fit, and I can also, if there's something that's too large that doesn't fit, if I double click this line, it automatically jumps to fit whatever element is inside it. So now report title, because it's in the page header, not the title, it will show on every page. Column header, this will make a lot more sense as soon as I add column header to details. These are things that, well, let's go ahead and build one of these. No, let's hold off for just a minute. In a minute, I'm going to show you how to really easily add elements to column header and detail, and perhaps column footer. Page footer appears at the bottom of every page, and summary band appears at the bottom only of the last page. So those are your bands. There are other bands you can add. For example, if I right-click on the report over here, I could say Add Report Group, and then I can name it. And if I had some other fields here, like if I was grouping it by customer or by sales order or something, I could choose those, and I can add a group header or footer and click finish, and now I have these groups. We will not go into that on this basic one, but I'm going to delete it now, just get rid of it. But that can be done. You can add additional detail bands, etc. We'll not go into all that right now either, but just so you know that's available. So that's the summary of the report inspector. You've got your various things like parameters and fields, then you have your bands and the elements to go within your band. Also, that's our very brief overview of the middle section, the designer. By the way, if you want to see this not in the WYSIWYG, you can look at the XML and you can see the code for it. And occasionally you can work with the code here, but it'll be very rare. Sometimes if you're looking, you get an error message and you're looking for where that might appear, you can come here and do a control find and type in something you're searching for, and then it gets all highlighted all nicely. And you can also do preview, which actually executes the report, connects with the database, and returns any data. Of course, we don't have a query yet, so nothing's going to happen there. Let's go back. And finally, the palette. See, document has no pages because there wasn't anything to find. In the palette, you have static text, you have text fields. You'll get to know these a little bit more in a minute, and we'll go over some of these also in more detail. Rectangle, bringing shapes in, that's obvious. Bringing a line. You can, by the way, to select something, if you just lasso it from the right side, it selects everything that your lasso touches. You can resize things. If you lasso from the left side, nothing happens. In other words, it only selects things that you completely lasso. So there's a useful tip now and then. Sub-report will also tell you about those a little bit more in a minute. And properties, let's just briefly go over this. You can control the position here, so you can drag it around with your mouse, or you can type in here, I want it to move it 12 points on the left, hit enter, and now you've moved it over. And I can either click there to edit again, move it 5 over, or if it's selected, I can hit the space bar, that activates it. Move it back, flush left. Control the width, the height, for color. By the way, and if you set a background color, for example, let's say we want this to have a green background, you'll notice nothing changed, did it? Well, if you click this opaque button, now it changes. I don't know why. I guess that's so it can be white, so it can be clear and see-through without white. But if you don't have that, then the background color really does nothing. If you have a style, you could choose it there and apply it. You can usually things will be fixed relative to the top. They'll be stuck right where you want them. But sometimes you'll have an element right above this element which expands or closes depending on the results of your query. And so in that case, you can tell this next item down to float, and then it can get pushed down by the expanding element above it and not laid on top of that the other one as it stretches down below it. Note, however, that not all bands are capable of stretching. In fact, only the detail band is capable of stretching. So if you have your column footer and its band height is 45 points, if you put a table in there and it tries to expand to 100, it's not going to fit. But the detail band is designed to stretch as high as you need, just depending on however much data you actually put in there. Print repeated values. If you have like a part number and it's going to show 10 different rows, but you only want to show it once, and then have all the other rows unique, so it's easy to tell when you hit a new part number, you could turn this off and then it will only print it once. But of course the danger in that is that if you get more, if you have, like for example, if you have something where it's the price and you don't want to print repeated values, well, if you have two parts in a row, two products in a row, then if they have the same price, the second one is not going to show up. So usually you want to have that checked. Remove line when blank is useful often when sometimes with a parameter or something you get no results for something and you want it to not only be blank but actually compress and not take up any space on the page. That's a good one to use. Print in whole first band, so if it doesn't fit on a page, it'll jump to the next page and start over. It won't just start mid-page. You don't use that often. And print when detail overflows. This is useful if, let's say I have this field which is now 86 points wide, but sometimes it's, if this was a dynamic one, if this was something pulled from a query and it came in with something with 150 characters, that's not going to fit. Well, if you don't have this print when detail overflows checkbox checked, then when this comes up, it'll display whatever fits and the rest will be cut off. And if you open it up in Excel later, the rest of the data is not there. It's not even there. It just eliminates it. So by printing this, then it will, even if it's too narrow, it will contain the rest of the information when you need. Some of these we'll skip. Print when expression. This is a useful one that we'll look at more later. For example, if you have a parameter that says show details, and then if this thing were selected on, well, the one we're selected on is a header, right? So if we had a parameter that said show headers, then we could say print it when show headers is true. And if it's a Boolean, then it's even easier than that. But we'll get back to that later. There's the name, the text of it, and I could change that here. Let's change the width. Not enough. Here, drag it bigger. There you see, you can change the font, which is also available up here. And our default that we use is Open Sans, just because we know people have this and it matches the rest of our styles. And some other WYSIWYG things. Now, you'll notice that when we have different types of fields here, like instead of a static text, when I have a text field, there will be more options to choose, more properties to adjust over here. So that is your basic overview of the properties panel as well. Now let's do a little bit on the query, and we'll be done for this first video. Oh, let me go back and show you this. This button here, it looks like the hard drives, palettes or platters. That opens up your query. And this button here with the hammer, that compiles the report when you're ready to output it to a Jasper. And you don't always have your query right here. Sometimes you can create additional queries. So if I say add dataset, details, and then it walks you through a wizard. We won't do all that right now. Well, let's go ahead and do it since we started. Select name from company, because it wants to have some query there when you create it. And sure, we'll bring that one over and keep it simple. So now I have table 1 details. Now if I add a table to my report, like so, then I can use the results from this data set. In fact, if I add a table, I have to create another data set, and I cannot, because I have to apply it that way, apply which data set the results go to. I can't use this one right here, and that's why a lot of times when you open up this top one, you'll just say C select name from company where ID equals 1, and they just put that in so that there's some query for the main report, and then they put their actual query they want for all the details in the table here by clicking edit query, and that's where they do the actual one they'll use. But for this video, while I'm on the subject, the same thing goes for subreports. So if you add a subreport like this, you can either create a new one or you can create an existing one. And a subreport is just like this. It's a new report, and it has its own query in there, and you can share parameters and stuff between them. We'll cover that later. And then this report, when it hits that subreport, it actually goes and grabs that file and runs its queries and gets its results and inserts them into this file right here. So, end of that tangent. Let's do a quick search here. Before I do, I'm going to add one parameter that I want to use. I'm going to name this one SO num. It's a string type. You have all these choices. So you could do a Boolean if it's just a yes/no checkbox. You could do timestamps for date ranges. But for this one, for SONUM, since that can have letters and everything, we're going to leave that a string. If you check this checkbox, use sprompt, that means it's required to run the report. So no one can run the report until they make a selection. And if you wanted to have anything fit, just show all, then you can enter a default of that. But in this case, it's required. I'm not going to let them do a default. So now you see my SONUM. And by the way, this is not just a random one. You can create them randomly and name them anything you want. But like for custom fields, you can say, or for tracking lot number or shirt size, custom field, or whatever you want, and work that into your query. But there is a specific list at the bottom of the wiki on iReport of preset parameters, and here it is down toward the bottom of the page. And so SONUM, for example, this is one that automatically goes out and grabs the SO number, so people can search for a specific sale order. So it's useful to look over these and say, okay, this one's a string, and you have to title it, and capitalization matters and everything. So that's what I did. I used SONUM, and now I'll build my query. I'll say select product name, and by the way, since name is a common column name, I'm going to alias that. You could say product name as product, but as is not required, so I usually just leave it out. So item dot product num. Oh, by the way, that's not name. That's num. Now I do this product.num and so item.product num. they're usually the exact same thing. Of course, you can change it in the SO, but I did that just to make the point that it's really helpful to get to know all the database tables. That's part of what takes a little bit of time, but when you're just modifying existing reports, that's a lot easier. Let's go with SOID, or let's go with SONum. I guess that is SONum. SO item, let's say quantity to fulfill, and SO item dot unit price. And we do have kind of a standard way we do this with capitalization of the main things, and the rest you can do as you like. So we're going to select this from SO, and I'll join the others tables. Usually add a couple spaces to indent all the joins, so you got your select area, your from area, your where area. Left join SO item on SOD, SOD. And luckily, the vast majority of tables, the foreign keys, are they make a lot of sense. Product ID equals product.id. What else do we need? Okay, those are all the tables I referenced, so that's good for that. Where so.num like, and whenever you use, well, you probably know about that, like, and I'm going to grab this parameter that I already created and drag it in right there. You can always click a new parameter and just create one from right here if you are in the middle of writing a code and want another parameter. And we'll order by SO item ID. That'll put it in the same order as it originally was in the SO module. So down below, these are the fields that will appear. And you'll see, like product, that's my alias for product.num. Or where I don't have an alias, like quantity to fulfill, that is just named the name of the column there. And it shows what data type they are here. Now this sometimes gets important with SQL because a lot of times it returns things as big decimal type. And with big decimals, you can't do basic arithmetic, greater than, times, etc. So after it reads fields from your query and brings them down here and turns it into a big decimal, then if you want to do multiplication and such with it, you'll find it in your field list. Ta-da! Now we have field listings. There's unit price, quantity to fulfill, and you'll see over on the right side in the properties that this is big decimal type, and you can just turn those into doubles type, and then we can do multiplication and such. All right, now we have some fields. I'm going to drag these onto the detail band. Remember, detail means it's going to show up for as many results as there are. And notice when I do it, it automatically creates me a little header for that column. I'm not going to rename that if I want. Let's double click this line to draw those up so it's just the right size. And let's pull in our other fields. So we'll get product num, which I know it's useless to have in both there. Now when you line these up, if someone wants to export this to Excel, it's crucial that these line up just right. If you have a little space in between, that'll create an extra field in Excel. If one is just a little below the other, it'll throw it on a new row in Excel. So you want to line those up nicely. Fulfill and unit price. Okay, so close over. So here is my basic report, and now I am ready to compile it. So I'll click my compile button, and you'll see down below where it's compiling it to my Fishbowl 1710 folder, server reports custom. Oh, it's in my customer folder, because that's where currently the GRXML is saved. So that's where it automatically creates Jasper. So let's launch Fishbowl and actually load this up. When I first open Fishbowl, I open my reports and my data module, and then I click save so that it always opens this way for me. And we'll upload my brand new custom report. There it is, sample 1. Next, you'll say there's the name I gave it up here in the properties. Sample 1 example. Finish, and we'll run it. See, there's my SO parameter. Okay, and now we get an error. So let's click on the server log and find out what's wrong. Oh, here's one of the most common things that when you're building a brand new from scratch report, you often forget to do. No problem. It's looking for a class of Groovy. Now I know that sounds lovely, but it doesn't work. So we'll click on your main report thing and come over here to properties, and we'll change that to Java, compile it again, and all will be well. Oh, except I'll show you it's not quite well, and I'll tell you why. Compiling, finished. Watch this, I'll try and run it again. Same exact error. It says, look, it still thinks it's Groovy, and that is because I'm compiling it to the customer folder, but when I uploaded it, it put it into the custom folder. So I now actually have a custom folder. So if I upload it again, and this time to the custom folder, which just got created, it's the same name, same location where it's showing up, so it overrides that. And this time, it gets another error. What's up? All right. Here's what happened. I just went into the custom folder. I loaded that one. That was the original one I loaded. It was the same exact thing. So I'll go back to my customer folder where I actually really did just recompile it. And this time it works like a charm. So you'll run into all kinds of errors and problems and doing things wrong. And if something ever really puzzles you and you're just pulling your hair out thinking this should work, it's probably just a dumb little oversight, a little detail you missed, like what I just did, rather than something wrong with your code. Okay, the last thing I'll point out before I end this video is notice here where it says quantity fulfill 1.0 and unit price, it has these decimals on there. If you don't want them to show up, that's what variables, well, that's one of the best uses for variables. I don't have the ones in here right now, but you can copy them from other reports. There's some like cost decimal, price decimal, quantity decimal, and that automatically, and then the way you apply that is you say on quantity to fulfill, for example, pattern expression right there. And you'll go in and you'll, by the way, here's another last thing to show you. Click here, here are all your fields. So you can say, throw that in there. Of course, it doesn't make sense in this case. There are your parameters, here are your variables, and if you had quantity decimal variable, you could apply it right there. Oh, and to do that, by the way, you have to double click to make something appear in there. And then your quantity decimal variable will show up, and then when you run the report, it will take care of those decimals and for price and cost. And, well, I'll avoid more detail than you need right now, but there's your overview. I hope that helps. Welcome to the team, and review this if you need quick reviews. I'll make a couple other videos and ask us questions otherwise.